Thank you very much, Mr. Hodges, for this interview. We're meeting a very significant time. Nearly a year has passed since our last interview. And unfortunately, under the rule of Georgian Dream, Georgia, once a beacon of democracy, is turning into a country headed toward dictatorship. We might even lose visa-free travel with EU instead of fulfilling the EU's basic conditions. Ivanishvili's prime minister essentially rejecting the benefits of free movement. Once again, they blame the West, have returned to war rhetoric, and claim that the visa liberalization is at risk only because Georgia did not join the war. Gogsadze is now practically admitting that we might lose free travel with Europe. Why have they returned to the topic of war?
Well, this is a ridiculous assertion that somehow the West is trying to drag Georgia into this war. What we're trying to do is help Ukraine survive against Russia. You know, why can't Russia live inside its own borders? You know, respect the sovereignty of its neighbors. It did not respect the sovereignty of Georgia. And because we failed to act and do anything about that back in 2008, they felt emboldened to do this against Ukraine. And so I think the idea that somehow we're trying to drag Georgia into this makes no sense. What we are trying to do is help Ukraine.
Yes, we know very well that the second front rhetoric is complete nonsense, just like the so-called global war party and deep state influence in Georgia. But the fact is that Ivanishvili manages to keep the country hostage because no one is giving a proper response. If visa-free travel is actually suspended, what will it mean for Georgia?
Russians have visa-free travel all over Georgia. The last time I was there, I saw thousands of trucks with that were Russian trucks and cars and people coming in and out of Georgia. So, I mean, the narrative that somehow we're dragging Georgia into it, but actually it's Russia that is pouring into Georgia. So if anybody's pushing against Georgia, it's Russia. If you lose the visa-free travel, then I think it becomes much more difficult for young Georgians, students who want to go to university somewhere, or people who are looking for work as some sort of a leverage. So then now you've got young people will pay the price, and young business people, students will pay the price for this. So I don't see why anybody in government that cared about their people would take steps that they know will lead to the end of visa-free travel.
Why does the oligarch dare so much? Why did he choose the path of Belarus, imprisoning opposition, citizens and journalists? Why did the US and the West allow this to happen? Is Georgia no longer a strategic partner?
I think there's a combination of things. Part of this, of course, is that American and European understanding of the strategic importance of Georgia has been inconsistent. So, I mean, the narrative that somehow we're dragging Georgia into it, but actually it's Russia that is pouring into Georgia. So if anybody's pushing against Georgia, it's Russia. If you lose the visa-free travel, then I think it becomes much more difficult for young Georgians, students who want to go to university somewhere, or people who are looking for work. They're not designed to help young people of Georgia reach their potential.
This is becoming more obvious, but still, what gives Ivanishvili the courage to dictate terms to a superpower? For example, the US ambassador stated that Georgian Dream sent the current US administration a letter that was threatening, insulting, and unserious. And it was very poorly received in Washington. In your opinion, Why is Ivanishvili escalating tensions with Washington?
Well, it's hard. I don't know how much of this is linked to or driven by Moscow, or is it he has made the decision that he wants to be completely affiliated with Moscow, which of course is how he got most of his wealth to begin with. Um, I think that the ambassadors we've had, including the one who just departed, Ambassador Donegan, these were good, hardworking public servants, professional foreign service officers. Instead of barking at her, it should take a look. Was her assessment accurate? Was it legitimate? And of course, they would not want to have to acknowledge that.
Alongside worsening relations with the West, Georgian Dream has changed its foreign policy vector. You likely saw the Georgian Prime Minister's visit to Tehran. Natia Gogsadze was sitting in the same hall where people were chanting "Death to America" and "Death to Israel." The Hamas leaders surrounding him have since been killed. No one forgets that footage, and I often bring it up. So I ask you, what caused such a radical shift in Georgia's foreign policy, in your opinion?
I don't know how that helps Georgia. I mean, what are Georgia's interests there? Why would he do that?
Would you have imagined that the leader of country aspiring to NATO membership would make such a choice?
No. Yeah, I never imagined that Georgia would be where it is now. I can remember the first time I met soldiers from Georgia in Iraq, and then again in Afghanistan, and then when I became the commander of NATO Land Command in 2012, had my first visit to Georgia. Had the honor of meeting your president and getting to know military and government officials, and you could feel the energy of a very vibrant society, a media that was aggressive and searching for truth. Young people, you could just feel the optimism. It was such a positive direction. And here in about just over 10 years, where we are now, legislators have to be brave and stand up against oligarchs and autocrats. Democracy is not a ballet. It is a rugby football all the time.
Given all this, isn't it time for the U.S. to impose sanctions on Ivanishvili and the leaders of Georgian Dream? What we're seeing is that Ivanishvili is most concerned about his money. Before the 2024 parliamentary elections, he even said he didn't meet with the U.S. ambassador because he was worried about his personal finances.
Well, policies about Georgia should not be separate to just Georgia. It should be part of a larger Black Sea strategy. What are America's interests in the region? How can we use economic tools? My recommendation would be, instead of encouraging sanctions against individuals, they have to have a strategy first, and then you do what's necessary to achieve that strategy. That would be my preferred approach.
Ivanishvili seemingly seems concerned about sanctions. That's the only thing they respond to, and it has become very clear.
I'm not against it. I'm just saying it has to be part of a larger strategy that uses, it addresses the information domain as well as the economic domain and diplomatic domain.
Now let's move to the regional context. Armenia and Azerbaijan are trying to distance themselves from Russia, essentially pushing Russia out of the Caucasus. Georgia, on the other hand, is practically following Russia into the grave, as you've said many times, handcuffed to the Putin's coffin. There's also talk of reopening the Zangezuri corridor. Do you think this could weaken Georgia's transit role, or might it actually strengthen it?
Well, Um, Russia has turned out to be a terrible ally. The Armenians saw that because Russia did nothing to help them against Azerbaijan. They did nothing to help Assad in Syria. They did nothing to help Iran. I think the government of Georgia should take a close look at this. Why is it that Russia does nothing to help its allies? Why would Georgia want to isolate itself from the West as well as from these other countries that are moving away from Russia? That would cause me to look seriously at my own, my policies if I'm the government of Georgia.
So, in your view, will this reduce Georgia's transit potential?
I don't know. As long as they're, in Georgia, that's how is the government going to pay attention to this and use this?
Now let's talk about Ukraine. There's been a positive development in terms of air defense. Kyiv, after a long struggle and high cost, has received approval for Patriot missile systems. NATO will serve as an intermediary. Member states will buy and transfer this strategic system to Ukraine. What impact will this decision have on the war, and how significant is NATO's involvement?
Yeah, well, I'm glad anytime we can provide something to Ukraine. So I'm not against that, but I think that this is the announcement by the president back on Monday. When you shine a bright light on it and look at what actually is happening, I'm not too impressed. At least not yet. I remain skeptical. First of all, Patriots will do nothing to help against drones or glide bombs. Patriot's the best in the world for what it does against enemy airplanes and missiles, but it's no help against the hundreds of drones that hit Ukrainians every night. So there's more required than just Patriot. And by the way, I don't think we're going to see too many Patriots moving anytime soon. And I don't understand the 50 days. Why would we tell Russia you get 50 days? Basically, this was a green light to the Kremlin. You can do whatever the hell you want for the next 50 days. We're not going to do sanctions. So this has the feeling to me of number one, a business thing versus national security. And number two, I seriously doubt that the president will do anything in 50 days because so far he's not done anything.
So what do you think Ukraine needs most right now?
Well, of course, the most important thing that we could provide Ukraine would be a public commitment to make sure that Ukraine is going to win this war. That a public statement by the president that says it is in our interest that Ukraine is able to successfully defend all of its sovereign territory and that Russia is forced to live inside of its own sovereign borders. Right now, Putin only keeps doing this because he's pretty sure we are not going to commit that, and he doesn't care about his own casualties. So if we want to get him to the table, he has to see that we're committed. And we have to use our own economic power to disrupt Russia's ability to export oil to China and India. And, these shadow fleet vessels that go out through the Black Sea and the Baltic Sea, we've got to stop that. And we've got to enable Ukraine to strike Russian oil and gas infrastructure, the refineries, where they load these ships with oil. Those are legitimate targets that need to be hammered, and we should give them the ability to do that.
You may have seen NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte's special press conference in the US Senate, where he said sanctions might target China and India. More specifically, Rutte said secondary sanctions would be imposed on Brazil, China, and India if they continue trading with Russia and supporting Putin's war effort.
Yeah, this is the kind of pressure that needs to be applied. I mean, if China would stop buying Russian gas and oil and stop providing components to the Russians for their weapons, Russia would have a very difficult time staying in the war. Same for India. So certainly, I would hope that we are talking to those nations about how we can help mitigate, because they need the oil and gas, obviously, but get them on side. And that will be a combination of sticks and carrots. Find incentives for them, but also they need to feel real consequences of buying Russian oil and keeping Russia in the war. If they don't, then they should pay a price.
This is closely related to the EU 18 sanctions package against Russia, targeting its shadow fleet. Slovakia and Hungary lifted their vetoes, leading to some of the strongest sanctions ever imposed on Russia. 105 ships of Black Sea fleet will be sanctioned, 22 Russian banks will be cut off, Nord Stream 1 and 2 will be permanently banned, and the oil price cap will be sharply lowered. Europe has never taken such a tough approach before. How effective do you think this comprehensive strategy will be?
Russia their economy is already set up or propped up with artificial means that I don't think are sustainable. And Russian economy experts, finance experts, have said this publicly. So if left unaddressed, it could probably go for another year or so, like it is now. But imagine if we started applying real pressure on Russia economically, it could become very difficult for them, and they would have to change what they're doing, both in terms of modernization, growing the size of the force, buying ammunition from North Korea, and everything else that they need for this war. I mean, these are not gifts from China or North Korea. They're paying for this, and so make it difficult for them to do that as well. This would be even more helpful to Ukraine than sending over Patriot.
Since you were my guest, I want to ask about one more topic. There are reports that Trump once asked Zelensky whether he would bomb Moscow, and supposedly received a positive answer. How likely is this to be true, and why would a president ask such a question?
Well, I don't know why the president would ask that. If maybe he was just angry at what Putin did the night before, but it's actually an interesting question if he really asked that. And of course, what we're not talking about, the Ukrainians launching missiles into downtown Moscow the way the Russians do it, that would be a waste.
Such a bombing would likely have had more of a psychological impact.
I imagine the Ukrainians, when they have the ability, would go after these factories that manufacture drones. They would go after airfields from which the Russians are launching their strikes against Ukrainian cities, on St. Petersburg, for example, or drone factories outside of Moscow. That will achieve the psychological effect as well without actually wasting missiles or drones against non-military targets.
Okay, I do understand. Since we mentioned Iran earlier, we must discuss Israel's operations as well. It was hugely important to shake the regime of the Ayatollahs, allies of Russia, and to destroy Iran's nuclear ambitions. But do you think what has been done is enough?
It was impressive what they did. I mean, I'm very proud of what our Air Force and Navy did, working with the Israelis to be able to launch those strikes. I mean, that was impressive. But again, we know from history that air power by itself is not going to be decisive. And we're pretty confident now that we know that the Iranians still have a large amount of enriched uranium, and they still have the knowledge of how to do this. And so while they may have lost a couple of years, what is the strategy for the region? And so when it comes to Iran, what is the strategy for the region? How does this fit into a bigger picture of what are American interests.
Should the U.S. have pushed this process further, especially given that the regime continued persecuting its own people who longed for change and freedom? Scientists were killed and much of the nuclear program was dismantled, but still.
Well, we don't know that it's completely destroyed. That's my point. And we don't know that all the scientists have been killed. I mean, you can't destroy the knowledge that's there. And so the regime, in the aftermath of this 12-day war, whatever, went out and rounded up anybody that they suspected of possibly being anything to help Israel or help the U.S. or being anti-regime. They use it as an excuse to put more people in jail and to execute lots of Iranian citizens.
We must now conclude our interview. Thank you very much for being with us and giving this interview for our new platform On Time and for answering our questions. We're very grateful to you once again for this insightful conversation.
I would only like to say that I worry about you and all my Georgian friends, and I look forward to when we can reconnect in Tbilisi and think about better times ahead.
Yes, I do hope we can meet in Tbilisi. Goodbye. Thank you very much.